Hey everybody, so it's time for another season preview video, and next up is your defending Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals. Again, like I said, I'm doing these in reverse alphabetical order because everybody does them in alphabetical. So the Capitals won the Stanley Cup last season. And again, I'm using Roster Resource as my main way to put these lines together and stuff, so don't yell at me if you don't like the lines, but this is what Roster Resource has. This team won the Stanley Cup last year. They went on a great run in the playoffs. But looking at this lineup now, I don't see a repeat in the future. I just don't. So let's look and see what we got here. So the top line is the line that really came together in the playoffs this past year and really played well and produced well. Alex Ovechkin with Evgeny Kuznetsov and Tom Wilson. Then the second line, I think Burakovsky or Vrana can kind of be interchangeable there, but I'll put Vrana there because that's what Roster Resource has. Vrana, Backstrom, and Oshie. Then that moves Burakovsky to the third line with Eller and Connolly. And your fourth line is Chandler Stevenson, Travis Boyd, and Devontae Smith-Pelly. On the back end, you have John Carlson as your number one, with probably Michael Kempny playing with him. That gives you a second pair of Matt Niskanen and Dmitry Orlov. And your third pair, this is what they had, is Christian Hughes and Madison Bowie, with Brooks Orpik as your seventh defenseman. I honestly think that Orpik probably gets into the lineup ahead of one of these two guys. That's just my opinion. In goal, you have Braden Holtby, obviously, as the starter, and with Philip Grubauer traded away and gone off to Colorado, your backup situation is interesting. It's either going to be Phoenix Copley or Ilya Samsonov, a young goaltender out of Russia. And the word that I'm hearing is that Samsonov is actually the top front runner for that backup job on Holtby. So we'll have to see how the preseason goes, how training camp goes. But I think Samsonov has the foot in the door for right now, ahead of Phoenix Copley. But anything can happen. Your extra forwards, Nick Dowd and Nathan Walker. So that's your Washington Capitals lineup for this year. And man, this is a top-heavy team. This is a team that is completely reliant on their star players to produce points all the time and be star players. And if they slip at all, this team's in big trouble because this is not an overly deep team. This is a very top-heavy team. And this is what happens when teams are good for long stretches of time. They get into salary cap problems, and you start paying these high-end players high-end money, and then it's tough to fill out a fourth line, or a decent fourth line. It's tough to fill out a bottom pair because you're right up against the cap. And this is how the cycle goes in not just hockey, but any professional sport with a salary cap. When you're good year after year after year, like Washington is, you have to pay your players more because they play better, and you don't get as good a draft picks, and as you pay players more, you get closer and closer to the cap, and then you struggle to fill in the depth part of your roster, and that's what we have right now in Washington. I'm not saying this team is certainly not saying that they're going to be bad or anything. I expect them to be a very good team. I expect them to be a playoff team. I don't see another Stanley Cup in their future, this coming season. I don't think they repeat. I think depth is too big of an issue here for them to repeat. And really, when you think about it, last year, in no way am I trying to take away from their Stanley Cup win last year. They absolutely played well enough to win, and they deserved to win it, and they beat everyone that they played and won it. But if you go back to Game 3 of the first-round series against Columbus, that game went to overtime. And if Columbus had scored in overtime, that series is 3-0, Columbus. Washington probably loses in the first round in 5 games. Braden Holtby might not be the starter in Washington anymore. He might be moved and Philip Grubauer given the net. Things could have been totally different had Columbus scored in Game 3 in overtime of Game 3 in the first round of last year's playoffs. One goal could have changed everything, but Washington scored and then went on to win that series in 6. Then went on to win the next series and the next series, and they went on a run, and they went on a great Stanley Cup run, and really, took it to the rest of the teams they played, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, and then Vegas. And they certainly deserved to win the Cup, but they did it on a run. And that just shows how, quickly things can change in the NHL, especially where in a league like this where there's a lot of parity and there are a lot of good teams. This is not the NBA where it's the same two teams in the finals every year. It is a long, hard road to the Stanley Cup. And I just don't think Washington's going to do it again. Because really, when you look at it, they were one goal away from not doing it last year. And they got the goal that they needed, and they did it. Now, what are the chances of them getting that goal again this year? With all the other good teams out there, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to repeat. So again, they're not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there are some question marks here. I think, their fourth line, Chandler Stevenson, Travis Boyd, and Devontae Smith-Pelly. Devontae Smith-Pelly had a fantastic playoff last year, but that was the playoffs. He's never been that kind of player throughout his whole career. He went on a good run just like the team did, but he's not going to consistently produce that well offensively. So I worry about their fourth line. And then what if people start getting injured? Injuries happen all the time in hockey. What if people start getting injured? You're moving these players up into higher roles than fourth line. That's a problem. You start taking these guys out of the lineup and putting even lesser players in there. That's going to be an issue. On the back end, I think Brooks Orpik ends up being in the regular lineup, and one of these guys is your seventh. But what do you have beyond your seventh? What if you have two defensemen out? Again, depth is the issue here. The backup goaltender situation, I really don't know what to think of it. Holtby is clearly the starter. Holtby had a horrible season last year. People forget that. If Washington didn't win the Cup, Braden Holtby might not be the Washington Capitals goaltender anymore. He might have been moved because he had a horrendous regular season. Now, he was great in the playoffs. Once he came in Game 3 of the first round in the playoffs, and he just took over from there and looked like the Braden Holtby that we're all used to. And most people now still think of Braden Holtby as this elite top-level NHL goaltender, which he was in the playoffs. But don't forget how bad he was in the regular season. He gave up 3 goals a game in the regular season last year. That is not Braden Holtby numbers. That is not NHL starter numbers. So what if Holtby has a bad regular season again? I don't know if either of these guys can come in and play significant number of games the way that Philip Grubauer did last year. Copley is a career AHLer. He's been good in the AHL, but he's a career AHLer. And Samsonov is a kid just coming out of Russia I know nothing about. How's he going to react to the NHL stage? So Washington is a championship caliber team, and they proved it last year, but they do have some question marks. A lot of things went right for them last year for them to win it. And again, I'm not trying to take away from it. Every Stanley Cup champion has had things have to go right for them, and probably most of them at some point have been on the brink of not making it and losing early, and they pulled it out. So this is nothing new. But what are the chances of everything going right for you 2 years in a row? It's just very unlikely. Repeating in the NHL is extremely hard. So Washington, I like their lineup. I think they've done the best that they can with what they have. I think paying Tom Wilson over $5 million a year was absolutely ridiculous. But they're a team that has a strong core in place that won a Stanley Cup last year. They wanted to keep as much of that core in place as they could. They have some very, very high-end talent. Obviously, Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, Backstrom, Oshie, Carlson, Niskanen, Holtby. They have some very high-end talent. But the depth worries me because when you have that much high-end talent, you can't pay for good depth guys. And I just worry about the bottom six. I worry about their third defense pair. I worry about the backup goaltender situation. So I certainly expect Washington to be a good team. I expect them to make the playoffs. They should be one of the top 3 teams in the Metro Division. I don't know if I trust them to make a deep playoff run again. That's really where I think they're at. I think they're a playoff team, but they could definitely be ousted early in these next 2019 playoffs. So they won the Cup last year, and huge congratulations to them for that. But I just don't see a repeat in the future, and we'll have to wait and see how the season goes. So that's what I think about Washington. Very top-heavy, reliant on their high-end talent. Depth really is lacking as far as I'm concerned with that team. So like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are in the description below. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.